welcome everyone. I think we're going to make a start to this webinar. Again, just a warm welcome to all of you. Welcome to you from wherever you are. So the session is called Reflections at the Intersections, where we ask the questions that matter when it comes to gender equality and inclusivity in the research space, where we ask the questions that matter when it comes to gender equality and inclusivity in the research space. So this webinar is an initiative of the Gender Equality and Inclusivity Project of the Science Grant-Making Council's initiatives. Lots of acronyms there, you'll bear with me. This project on gender equality and inclusivity is currently being implemented by ourselves at the Human Research Council here in South Africa, and partners from Porsche and Jive Media Africa, who are all on this dialogue. We're going to be hosting the series quarterly, so we really want to ask you to please look out for our announcements about future webinars. As I said, I'm Heidi van Rooyen. I have the pleasure of being your facilitator for this inaugural webinar. And our focus really today is, why do we need a gender lens in research funding? Why do we need a gender lens in research funding, and why this matters now? So if you'll allow me just a few minutes to give some background to this project on gender equality and inclusivity, which has been running for a few years now. The HSRC, the Human Sciences Research Council, joined the Science Grant-Making Council initiative in Sub-Saharan Africa in 2020. We were appointed to support science granting councils in strengthening their capacities in gender and inclusivity. So this acronym you'll hear often in my introduction and as I introduce speakers, Science Grant Council Initiatives, or SGCI, is a multi-funded capacity building initiative launched in 2015 with the aim of supporting the development of research and evidence-based policies that contribute to socioeconomic development. In the chat box, we'll post a link to the regional brief, country profiles, and gender and inclusivity themed posters that we conducted in our previous cycle of this work. So it's there for you in case you are interested and want to read a bit more about the work. At the moment, we are working with 13 councils to strengthen and mainstream gender equality and inclusivity as a cross-cutting theme in their work, with a particular focus on doing so in the grant-making cycle. Our approach to this work on mainstreaming, on thinking about helping councils to address issues of gender equality and inclusivity, our approach to this work is participatory and engaged. We work with where councils are at, we work at their pace, and we are guided by their needs, their interests, and their capacities. As we've done this work over these past few years, we've realized something really important and fundamental, that all councils are at different stages of their gender equality and inclusivity journey. Some are advanced in terms of integrating these issues into their work and understanding what it means to adopt an intersectional approach to their work, while others are brand new to the work and are at the very beginning. As I indicated earlier, the focus is on the grant-making cycle as an entry point into addressing issues of gender equality and inclusivity. We believe by focusing on this grant-making cycle, that there are many touch points that become available to counselors who can powerfully use the cycle to advance their work on gender equality and inclusivity. So they can do so at various points, whether it is to include more leaders, women leaders in research teams, or to attract more women researchers to apply for grants. That grant-making cycle provides various touch points at which they could decide to intervene, to act, to change, to address gender equality and inclusivity. Our belief in a participatory and engaged approach to this work, alongside our knowledge of the success that comes from peer-to-peer learning, encourage us to launch this dialogue series. Our hope is that these will provide council with a further opportunity to share their insights and achievements while working in gender equality and inclusivity. But we also hope that this will become a place for including newcomers to this area of work, people who are aware of the need for gender transformation in their spheres of influence, in their environments, in their spaces, but may need some help to get started. We hope that We want you to have a sense of perhaps a broader network of support that exists in this particular space that you could draw on, that is available as a kind of resource and support to you as we all commit to doing this really important work. So in summary, our aims for this dialogue are as follows. It's an opportunity for us to learn, to reflect, and to connect with each other. We have a couple of hopes as well as we do this learning, reflecting, and connecting. We hope that in the process, perhaps you learn something new. Perhaps you come away with a new idea. Perhaps you feel challenged to think differently. Maybe you will come away from this webinar being and feeling reassured that you are on the right track and encouraged that there are others like you who are walking a similar path. For this, our first dialogue session, we've invited 3 key players in the research landscape, regional and international levels, all of whom have experience in the implementation of gender equality and inclusivity projects and concepts, and who we believe can effectively set the foundations for later dialogues. They will each talk from their different standpoints about the importance and value of mainstreaming gender equality and inclusivity, and why it's become a pressing issue at this point in time and in relation to achieving international and regional development goals. The webinar will follow a structured format, beginning with the 3 panelists each giving some input on the topic. We then will move into an open question and answer session where you're welcome to ask questions via the chat box. Please be aware that the session is being recorded and will be available on the HSRC YouTube channel afterwards. This is also where you can catch up on dialogues you may have missed later on in this series. The HSRC YouTube channel is the place to go. Well, not for everything, for some things related to this and others. To ensure you don't miss out on upcoming dialogues and other important announcements, I would really like to encourage you to sign up for the SGCI, Science Grant Making Council's initiative, Gender Equality and Inclusivity quarterly e-newsletter. We're going to work on those acronyms and find a way of saying that also easily so it just flows off my tongue in future. But we have a newsletter. We'd love you to sign up for it and to please also stay tuned via our media channels. We're really excited about the wonderful turnout we've got for today. You can see by the many tiles and names and people that have joined us. We really are delighted with the turnout. So please continue to introduce yourselves and engage in the chat box. And don't hesitate to use that same chat box for any questions at any time throughout the webinar. So that's enough from me, I think. I think what has drawn most of you to this seminar is to hear from our 3 speakers, our 3 panelists who are going to be talking to us about this particular theme and focus today. I'm going to introduce all 3 of them and then invite each of them to give their opening reflective comments. So I'm pleased to do this, to introduce our panelists to you today. So we have first up Dr. Dorothy Ngila. She's the Director for Business Advancement at the South African National Research Foundation, the NRF, known to many of us locally. Dorothy coordinates the contribution of the NRF to the Science Grant Making Council initiative in Sub-Saharan Africa and advances the NRF's engagement in regional and global knowledge networks. She is interested in institutional capacity strengthening in Africa and integrating gender and intersectionality in science. She sits on various boards addressing these issues and provides a valuable regional perspective on gender, equality, and inclusivity. A very, very warm welcome to you, Dorothy. Our second panelist today is Dr. Jemima Njuki, who gets the prize for being up at the most ungodliest hour to join us for this webinar. She joins us from New York today, and when we started the briefing about half an hour ago, it was 6:30 in the morning. So please do send some love and a very warm and special thank you to Dr. Njuki for making the time to join us at the early hours of her day. So Dr. Njuki is the Chief of the Economic Empowerment Section at UN Women. She's a recognized leader on gender equality and women's empowerment, having directed global initiatives promoting women's economic empowerment. For the last 2 years, she has led the UN Food Systems Summit on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Lever of Change and was instrumental in establishing the coalition to make food systems work for women and girls. She's led the gender equality work at an international level for the IDRC, the International Development Research Center, for CARE USA, and at the International Livestock Research Institute. We really are lucky to have you, Dr. Njuki, and welcome. And thirdly, and certainly not lastly, but a very, very, very warm welcome to you, Ms. Erica Westwood. She's a senior science advisor at the International Center for Antimicrobial Resistant Solutions, ICARS. She's a global health researcher and program manager with diverse experience working in infectious disease programs for low and middle income country settings. Her professional work has taken a strong focus on determinants of health. For example, to working with Indigenous health and with vulnerable populations where health is viewed holistically. In her current role at ICARS, she has been responsible for championing the gender and inequity stream of work with the aim to support better antimicrobial resistant solutions around the world that in parallel promote equity and sustainability. And so you can hear from those very brief introductions that we are in good company. And I'm going to invite each of the panelists to start the discussion with a brief scene setter by giving some insights into this topic based on their background and experiences. We'll start in this order. We'll start with you first, Dorothy, and then come to you, Jemima, and then round up with you, Erica. So thank you each of you. We look forward to hearing your thoughts. And I'm going to go off the video for a second and give the spotlight to you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Prof. Van Rijn, for inviting me. Dear colleagues, it's really great that we are convening again to have this very important conversation. So, public funders of research have a really catalytic role to play in responding to this very grim statistic that has been shared with us, that has had this conclusion. I thought in terms of my scene setting remarks to focus on three key aspects and to foreground the NRF's specific role in supporting this work over the years. When we think about how we have to fix this grim statistic that we've heard, I want to borrow from our dear brothers and sisters from the German Research Foundation, who think about this work in three ways: fixing the system, fixing the science, and fixing the numbers. I have found it very useful to think about my advocacy role and to think about the actions that I would like my organization, the National Research Foundation of South Africa, to take by reflecting on these three key areas. When we think about fixing the system, and all of these components really are thinking about this from an ecosystem approach, rather than from siloed ways of fixing the statistic. When we think about fixing the system, public funders of research have a really important role in putting in place the right policies and procedures and strategies that are going to ensure that the question of gender and inclusivity is mainstreamed across all of their activities, across their different mandates. At the NRF, we currently have 4 very important documents that speak to this question and that support the science as well as the numbers. We have our EDI policy that is now currently in its finalization process that really tells the organization where are the areas that we need to be focusing on, both for the science and both for the numbers as well. We have a transformation framework that foregrounds the importance of us transforming the research enterprise in South Africa so that it is fit for purpose and so that it is fit for everyone that engages in it. I think about fixing the science, and this is so important to be able to bring to the fore findings and recommendations on women in science, on science for women, funding specific areas and thinking about how sex and gender are utilized as units of analysis. The NRF has recently joined Equity 2030 Alliance of UNFPA, and we had the opportunity to really reflect as an organization the ways in which the science we are funding, the research that we are funding, is supporting us fixing the science. So I wanted to share some of the examples are, we have research chairs that are specifically focusing on areas such as gender and politics, gender, childhood, sexuality, violence, inequality, schooling, violent histories and transgenerational trauma, identities and social cohesion in Africa. And we've been piloting a methodology of how we do responsible research assessment by thinking about sex and gender as units of analysis and sharing with our panelists and reviewers how they must think about this as they analyze, as they review the applications that are coming to the NRF. And the last point, which is around fixing the numbers, is the area where we have actually done quite a bit of work globally. But there are specific interventions that need to be put in place so that we can be able to increase the numbers across the whole human capital development pipeline with a specific focus on leadership of research. At the NRF, our transformation document and our current EDI policy, for example, says to the NRF that we must pay specific attention to Black African women and colored women who are severely underrepresented in our system. We have a postgraduate funding policy that speaks to targets and speaks to how we specifically focus and support women, Black people who are considered underrepresented in the system. And we're focusing very much on supporting emerging researchers so that we can be able to build that pipeline of the research portfolio. So when we think about the grant-making cycle, these are some of the ways that the NRF is thinking of itself as an organization in supporting this work. We're really delighted to be able to think about what we do from an ecosystem approach, thinking about fixing the system, how we catalyze fixing the science, and how we catalyze fixing the numbers. Thank you, Prof. Van Rijn.
Thanks very much, Dorothy, for those opening remarks and that reminder of those. I always think that they're 3 useful points for action. So not just 3 useful points to thinking about gender equality, inclusivity, but really 3 useful points for action. Fixing the numbers, where a lot of us go and a lot of us might still have work to do, fixing the science and fixing the system. So it's a really useful frame that we can hold as we go into this discussion today. So thanks very much, Dorothy. Thanks very much to you. I'm going to move over to you now, Jemima. Very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for the introduction and for having me. Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure for me to join you. I'm gonna try, and I think one of the things I should say is, although currently I sit in the UN system, I spent most of my life in research, and so my reflections are going to span those 2 experiences, now being in the UN system and seeing what the value of research that takes a gender perspective is, and how research can actually play a much bigger role in terms of influencing how the world and where the world is moving. I really reflected on the questions that you asked, Heidi, at the beginning, in terms of why it is important to have a gender perspective in research and why now. And we really have to ask ourselves the fundamental question of why do we do research and for who do we do research? And if we can answer that question, then it also becomes clear who then should do the research. And then this brings us to 3 key areas that I really want us to reflect on in terms of how to think about gender and inclusion in research. And one is thinking about who's doing the research, who's getting the funding for research. I think it's what Dorothy called fixing the numbers, because it really is important who does the research. And over we see not enough representation of women in certain areas of research, in certain spheres of research, in certain levels of research. And when you take an intersectional perspective, you even see some groups of women even more underrepresented, whether these are racialized groups, indigenous women, or even younger women. The second one is what the subject of the research is. And this is where I think there's still a lot of struggles between a mainstreaming approach where we really want every research to have a gender perspective, while at the same time ensuring that gender and inclusion itself is a subject of research, because we do need to understand how to transform some of the current relations, some of the current situations and conditions around gender equality. And to do that, we really need to have gender and inclusion as a subject of research in itself. So those are just a couple of initial reflections based on that fundamental question that you asked us, Heidi. We are faced with a lot of crisis in the world at the moment. I think from UN Women, what we are experiencing most is what we call the pushback against gender equality. And I know we all know and understand that the pushback against gender equality has always been there in society. It is not new, but the last couple of years, we really have seen an intensified pushback, be it at national level in certain countries where the rights that we have fought so hard for are rolling back, but also at the global level with well-funded movements that are trying to really erode some of the gains, including around sexual health and reproductive rights. And so more and more, we really also want researchers to start thinking about these issues and what's driving change and how we can push, how we can use data and evidence to push back against this pushback. I want to reflect on some of the work we do at UN Women in terms of gender diversity and inclusion. And I want to say, for those of you that do not know UN Women, I think one of the advantages we do have is that we were actually created with a mandate for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. So our everyday bread and butter, if I may call it so, is gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. I want to talk about our 3 mandates and some of the things that we do there, and where we really see some very strong connections with research and with what the Science Granting Council is doing, and that we really would love to have a discussion and reflection on in terms of how we make the connection. The first one is on our normative work. We have a normative mandate for setting global norms and standards around gender equality and the empowerment of women. Now, to do this, we rely a lot on data and evidence to really convince governments about the need to have some of these global normative frameworks. And I'm going to give you just one example. For many years, a lot of countries have not collected data on the intersection between women's economic empowerment and the responsibilities that they have on unpaid care work. And so we have a program called the Women Count program, supporting statistical offices, supporting national researchers, national systems to really on a regular basis collect this data, because it's the only way we can put this data in front of governments and say, we do have a problem here. Some of the low numbers we're seeing, whether in research, whether in economic participation by women, are directly correlated with their unpaid care work and family responsibilities. And through a lot of those efforts, we actually just managed this year to pass a resolution through the General Assembly and through the Human Rights Council on the issue of care and support, and to really mandate governments to be the primary duty bearer and recognize care work as a public good, recognize unpaid care as a public good, but also the right to care and the right to decent jobs in the care sector as a human right. And a lot of this would not have happened with a lot of research and data from the research system and from national systems. The second issue I want to talk about that really relates to our mandate also is the issue of accountability. How do we hold organizations accountable for gender equality outcomes and for the empowerment of women and girls? One of the mandates we have as UN Women is a coordination mandate. We basically lead efforts for the whole UN system to advance the full realization of women's rights and opportunities for women and girls. And so one of the things we then have to do is work at country level and support all UN country teams to ensure that they're integrating gender equality and women's empowerment in their work. We are doing this a lot through capacity building, through providing guidelines on how they can do this, but more importantly, through an accountability mechanism where every year countries have to report against a set of core indicators that we call the UNCT SWAP, or the System-Wide Action Plan on Gender Equality. And we started with very low reporting by countries, and by now we are having 100% of countries actually report on how they're integrating gender around 7 dimensions of their work: the planning, program, monitoring and evaluation, third, partnerships, fourth, their communications, advocacy, leadership, and their organizational culture. Their gender architecture and capacities, making sure that they actually do have the people and the gender expertise to do the work. The resources they allocate to gender equality, they have to report on that, and then they have to report on their results on gender equality and the empowerment of women. And so as we move forward, really thinking about how we build accountability mechanisms for gender and inclusion. And the third thing I want to talk about is really the role of capacity and learning. And I think we learned this the hard way, even in research organizations, that people are not going to do gender research or mainstream gender into their research if they do not have the capacities to do so, and if they're not learning lessons, and if there are no good and best practices for doing this. So making sure that we actually are also providing organizations, research organizations, with the resources that they need to do this. One of the things that I lead in my team is something called the Equal Pay International Coalition. It's a global effort to reduce the gender pay gap around the world. And one of the best things about this Equal Pay International Coalition is it's a membership of governments, private employers, and this includes both public and private sector and civil society, but also workers unions, to really come together and share lessons about legislation, what legislations are working, how can we have effective legislation around reducing the gender pay gap. What are unions doing? How do we share lessons around effective bargaining by workers for equal pay? So there's a role of capacity building, but also sharing best practices across organizations is really, really important, and something that we really need to put a lot of emphasis on. I'm going to stop there and hoping that some of these lessons from what we are doing at UN Women can also inform research practices.
Thank you very much. Wonderful, wonderful, Dr. Njuki. Thank you very much. I think just highlighting those 3 mandates of that you kind of work with at your level at the UN, but I think wonderful reminders for us too. And I think for me, that issue of accountability that you set at that global level, but perhaps is a question for us and our accountabilities. How do we keep each other accountable in our organizations, in our institutions, at our level, to be moving some of these issues forward? And then again, just a really important reminder about the need for research that provides the evidence that allows us to shift policy, to shift practice, to make a case for why this is still necessary and needed. So thank you very much for those wonderful opening remarks. Thank you to you. And our third speaker is going to be Erica this morning. Erica, over to you for your opening remarks. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for the kind introduction and the opportunity to join this very distinguished panel. Today, I'll be speaking from my experience as someone coming from working in the space as a relatively new organization. It's also a newer area to me than with the panel. So hopefully this also gives some inspiration for those who are looking to start working more in terms of gender and inclusivity in the spaces that they are working within. So I have been very lucky to be able to champion gender and equity in my organization. The ICARS, the International Center for Antimicrobial Resistance Solutions. And I think it's important to say that we are both a funder and a technical institution, and we work with low and middle income countries on AMR intervention and implementation research. And when we look at implementation research and the implementation of health solutions, understanding who we're working with and who the communities are is paramount. But just as some background to this issue, so I come from very much a public health background from Canada. And in that space, I worked extensively in the area around social determinants of health, as well as within Indigenous health and with vulnerable populations. And in those spaces, a gender and equity lens is commonly applied. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but it's a common discourse. And now I've spent the last 5 years working specifically in antimicrobial resistance research. And I've always been very struck that gender has been rarely discussed, and let alone integrated within funding structures and research initiatives. And so it's really always been my perspective that a gender and intersectional lens really needs to become the norm and not the exception, as we're often seeing in many research spaces. And it's also important to say that this can take many different forms depending on the readiness of an organization or a project. And of course, we need to recognize that. But omitting this perspective in full, I don't think is something that we should be seeing anymore. But in preparation for this, I considered the question of why we need a gender lens in research funding. And again, I'm going to come from a health perspective, but I think that translates to many other research and social spheres. But from this perspective, when we look at community and individual experiences of different health challenges, this is innately affected by who we are and the social, cultural, and political and economic systems that we sit within. And at the end of the day, we want research to have a real world impact. And so if we don't understand the broader context and the context of the people that we are working with and where we would want to see health or development improvements at the end of the day as a result of the research initiatives that we are supporting, without understanding this broader context, I think we're really doing a disservice in terms of the likelihood of impact and sustainability, and potentially really sacrificing this. So when we speak to the question of why we need a gender lens in research funding, it's really because research operates in a gendered world. And the same goes for other social factors such as race, religion, educational status, and so on. So it's also a question of using resources well. If we're omitting a gender and inclusive lens from the research we're funding and the research we're conducting, we may see that what we are supporting is less likely to be adopted, is less likely to be impactful, and it also sacrifices opportunity for greater contribution towards development goals, regardless of the funding sphere that we sit within from a technical perspective. So for the second part of this intervention to start the panel, I wanted to speak a little bit to the journey that we've gone through at our organization to start to establish the importance for integrating a gender and equality perspective in how we are working. That being said, we're early in this phase and we're still learning. But when I joined the organization, which was about 3 years ago, it was very young. And in this context, the health work that we are doing in the field of AMR was very much viewed through a biomedical lens. And that was very much standard, as I mentioned before, across the AMR landscape. But what I have seen 3 years later, I see this perspective has changed quite a lot internally, as well as in terms of the global conversation has progressed a lot during this time span. But I think the internal shifts that we've seen as well have been quite exciting. also to see the importance recognized at different levels of the organization in terms of why we need to integrate a gender and equity lens in the projects we may be funding moving forward. Although we're still, as I said, learning in that stage. So hopefully more will be able to come in the coming months and years. But what I would say is that getting to this point was not straightforward. So I wanted to share a few factors that helped us get this on the table within the organization, and also to secure actual funding to be able to support this initiative. So first, we were starting to develop partnerships with other development-oriented funders who had a strong gender mandate. So for example, IDRC was mentioned, and they've been a good mentor in this space to our organization. But this meant that gender and inclusivity were more commonly suggested as a sub-theme within potential partnerships and initiatives with established actors. So that really provided that organizational recognition within that area. Second, there were some scoping reviews from other organizations, for example, a seminal document from the World Health Organization that provided a high-level foundation for this topic. But I would say it really drew attention to the fact that there had been very, very limited to no direct research funding in the AMR landscape that specifically looked at the interlinkages of gender inclusivity and AMR at that time. So this really also pinpointed a substantial gap. And these factors really came together for us in terms of the final catalytic factor for us, which was that the need for a gender and inclusivity lens really started to arise from understanding the context of potential projects that we were supporting that were specifically looking at interventions for antimicrobial resistance. So, for example, there was an interest from a team in Zambia to develop an intervention to reduce inappropriate antibiotic use for urinary tract infections. And by nature, this is a health condition that has a sex-based aspect that affects women more than men in terms of infection rates. But there's also a gendered aspect in terms of treatment-seeking behaviors, prescribing behaviors, and all of these factors will come together to affect women's likelihood of accessing and receiving appropriate treatment, and then, of course, their experience of disease in the short and, importantly, in the long term. Similarly, we were looking at a potential project to improve antimicrobial use in small-scale poultry farming in Tanzania, and it was very clear that a substantial portion of the farms that were potentially going to be part of the study, and just in the landscape more broadly, were operated by women, and they are. This is a common trend we see in many countries, but this doesn't mean that the women necessarily have decision-making mandates, especially financially within the household. So examples like this came together to really convince our organization that if we wanted to support impactful research, we needed to better understand how we could start to integrate a gender lens in the research that we are funding for the project development and implementation. So it actually led us to be able to build a convincing case to a development-oriented funder based in Denmark. And this funding has led to several impacts for our organization. So we started with first a public-facing request for proposal, which was dedicated only to AMR, gender and inclusion. And I would say the attention that this received was far more than was expecting. And I think that really showed the readiness and appetite of the research community. And so it's important that we are putting those opportunities out on the table because it becomes a very personal topic for many, but also an area where there's a need for dedicated research funding across different science domains. So then after this RFP, it led to a second collaboration, which was a long initiative with HSRC here today, which is wonderful. And that's been to develop a very practical resource to support AMR researchers to integrate a gender and equity lens into their work. So I think when we heard from Dr. Njuki about the need for capacity and learning within organizations, this is really something that we took on, that we needed to have a way to support the researchers that we are actually funding to be able to better understand a gender and equity perspective, and then also to be able to act upon it within their work. So I really encourage other funders to also ask a few questions. And this will, I guess, be my closing challenge to other funders and other individuals who want to start thinking about why they may need to integrate a gender lens into their work. So first, I think it's important that we ask, who are the communities that will benefit from this research? And do we really understand the gendered and inclusivity complexity, so also the intersectional complexities, enough to be able to actually achieve our objectives in terms of real world research impact, and importantly, to support wider development goals. And secondly, I would also encourage that we consider our unique position as funders to ensure that this perspective is integrated, also using a multidisciplinary perspective in the work we fund, regardless what our area of technical funding is. So with that, I will end here. Thank you very much, and I look forward to some interesting discussions.
Thank you very much, Erica. Thank you firstly for the challenge to others to broaden this framework and perspective and the ways in which we fund and resource and do our work. I thought that was really important. But I think you made some other really important contributions to this conversation. And I think for me, that's around the issue that context matters, and I think you're a very useful example of a health topic, but really looking at how those social determinants of health, where we live, who we are, gender, race, how all of those issues influence uptake and use of whatever our health intervention is. And that if we don't address gender and inclusivity, we're less likely to have the uptake and the use that we want. So I think you made a really important point there. And I think your lessons on how to do this work in a young organization, how to take it forward are really important. I think the importance of partnership. There are others out there that we can partner with and help us as we kind of take on this particular tackle. And I think, again, the importance of learning from others. Lots of us are doing this work in this space. We don't have to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. There's a rich body of work that's there. We can just add and amplify and strengthen that. So thank you very, very much for those contributions. Thank you to all three speakers who I'm sure you'll agree with me have really kind of given us lots to think about as we consider this particular topic of why gender equality and inclusivity matters in science, and why it matters now, and why we should be giving it the attention that we are through this webinar and through our work. We going to get the discussion going. We've got a healthy chunk of time, about 40 minutes or so now, for some conversation between you and the audience and our panelists. We've had some pre-discussion via the Eventbrite platform where people, as they're registered, were invited to drop in a few questions. And I'm going to kick us off with some of those questions now, and then invite you to continue to use the box and bots. It's a bit confusing. You'll forgive me for that slip between bots and box. The chat box this time to drop your questions, and we'll try and answer those as well. So a couple of questions to the panel. And the first question that's come through that I'm going to ask the panel to respond to is, what, in your opinion, are neglected areas that require greater focus? What are neglected areas that require greater focus with respect to women, gender equality, and inclusivity? And if I could just open that to the panel and ask one or two of you to respond to that first question, that would be great. Over to you, panelists. Dr. Njuki, like you're ready to go.
Yeah, I can start this. I can start us off, but I'm sure colleagues will have several issues as well. What we have seen from UN Women, especially when we are working with countries around data and research, is we see a lot of data that's very descriptive, that sort of describes what's happening in the world, whether it is women's labor force participation, whether it is the proportion of women who are now in parliament. So there's a lot of counting that's going on, and what we see less of is what are the cause and effect of things, because if you do not understand the cause and effect of things, then it is very, very difficult to then be talking about, okay, this is the action that's going to have the greatest change for us. So I think it's the extent to which research starts going more into deeper, and I see this a lot even with universities and those that are doing, whether it's students doing their research, there's a lot of descriptive work that's going on. It's very important, it's a first step, but we really need to start going deeper into, if there's a gender pay gap, it's very important to know there's a gender pay gap, because that is what then leads you to then ask, but why does this gender pay gap exist? Is it because there's occupational segregation? Is it unpaid care work? If then governments, all others are saying, what do we prioritize? What is it that we put on the table to say, actually, this gender pay gap, the biggest cause of this gap is this. If we fix this, then we start to make progress. So that's the first part. The second part then has to do with areas of research. I worked in food systems for many years. I actually was in our livestock program, supporting our livestock programs and our agriculture programs at IDRC when I worked there a couple of years ago to get some of the research going. So we also see certain areas that are very neglected, and especially when you think about mainstream research. How much of the research, for example, in the research councils is being directed to areas like unpaid care work? They're considered in a lot of ways. They would be what is considered soft research, and yet a lot of the things we see in how women are engaging with the workforce, in how women are engaging with research, doesn't have to do with even just the decisions they're making as women. They're making those decisions because they have limited choices. What's causing those limited choices? So there's also areas of research that have been more neglected. It's why we've had a huge focus, for example, on getting our national statistical systems to focus on unpaid care work, because it's considered work that women do anyway, and therefore, even if we collect it, what happens? Yeah. So there's also areas where we are seeing much more neglect. And that thing I would say is we need to start thinking about gender in a serious way in emerging areas of research, because we don't want to find ourselves in the situation we are in now, where we are saying we have gender data gaps in food systems, when food systems have been present for millennia. Yeah, now we're going to the information age, AI, and so on. How do we start actually embedding gender and the issues of gender equality within these new emerging areas? In the climate change space, we are talking about just transitions. How do we start already embedding so that gender equality is part and parcel of how we think about these issues? So I would say those three spectrums of what I see as missing.
Great, wonderful. Dorothy, Erica, anything to add to that? Dr. Njuki is focused on that research space. Anything that you want to add to that response?
Now, I have just a couple of points. I agree with everything that Dr. Njuki has mentioned. For me, I think we have to start thinking about the human capital development pipeline. If we're thinking about fixing the numbers, for a number of years now, we've been talking about how it's so important for us to create a cadre of people that are in research leadership, because they're the ones who are going to be supporting fixing the system in the end, right? And we need to start thinking about it from a human capital development pipeline, how we both support at the undergraduate level, but also making sure that we are putting in significant amounts of money for high-end investments. So in South Africa, for example, we talk about centers of excellence and research chairs. This is also around questions on infrastructure and who is managing the infrastructure that supports research on our continent. That's an area that I sometimes think that we are disconnected in the way that the support is being offered from a funder's perspective. Then the second part is to just hone in a little bit on the science. There is a lot of capacity strengthening that is required for researchers themselves to be able to understand the methodologies to use for when you have to apply sex and gender as units of analysis. So we talk about it a lot, but editors and researchers need to get some significant capacity strengthening so that they can be able to apply these as methodologies. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Erica, anything to add there, Erica? Thank you.
Well, I think the ideas I originally had around this question have been extremely well covered by my other panelists, but I think just 2 points I want to sort of echo and emphasize. So the notion that we need to go deeper into certain areas is absolutely critical, and it's not just to go deeper within a gender and inclusivity lens on its own, but to integrate that within other fields of investigation. And that's how we can support more mainstreaming. So this needs to be a conversation where other research fields are brought on board, because it's not a challenge that we can address in isolation as those who are working within this landscape. So also understanding ways that the importance can be further communicated to other disciplines, and to have ways of effectively working in multidisciplinary teams that integrate gender and inclusivity, I think is absolutely critical. And I think that area is highly challenging. Multidisciplinary work is difficult in so many spaces. But I think that if we're looking at aspects of integrating gender and inclusivity, it can feel very confrontational in some respects. So we need to have productive ways of having these multidisciplinary teams, initiatives, and programs that can really deeply investigate these issues, bringing in gender, social research expertise with the other areas of research expertise as well. And then I would just sort of echo the second point made around the methodologies that we need. So I think there is a lot available in terms of the methods, but it's daunting. And I think it becomes very difficult for researchers who are new to the space to understand how to effectively navigate a gender lens when asked by a funder, for example. Where does one start? So we need to also find clear methodologies that are also translated across disciplines and different sectors. So in my landscape, I see that there's a lot of challenges in the animal health context that I think the human health context has better grasped. Yeah. So I think we also need to look at the very unique actors and domains and make sure that the methodologies are suited for where research is being undertaken. Thanks.
Thank you to the panel. Some really, I think, important a challenge, I think, to those of us in the social sciences and humanities, and kind of saying we need to be doing more, we need to be going deeper, we need to be kind of looking at our methodologies. We have to provide that much needed evidence that's beyond the obvious. Gender matters is an obvious statement, but beyond that, it's our work to be providing that analysis and that kind of evidence that is needed. I want to segue to a question that a point that you made, Dorothy, around this human capital development pipeline, because it's another question that's come up from participants. And the question is, the issue of women in science and leadership positions persist in spite of many interventions, many of the interventions that you've just talked about. Are there any new challenges? What are those challenges that kind of prevent us from successfully kind of transitioning that issue and that aspect of gender throughout that pipeline? So I'll ask Dorothy and Jemima, perhaps if you want to respond to that, and then we'll go to a third question. Perhaps for Erica, you could start with that one. So Dorothy, over to you.
Thank you, Heidi. I think for me, I want to reflect on how we support women who are in leadership positions. Very often, what happens, and of course, this is a combination of anecdotal data and qualitative data that we have, is that we find that women in leadership positions are expected to do a whole lot more. They're expected to carry others. They are expected to open the doors. They are expected to do a whole lot more than what it is that they are leading, the content of it. And I don't think that we've stepped back a little bit to consider what are the support mechanisms that we need to put in place, whether it is peer support, whether it is a space, a safe space for you to be able to access resources for negotiating, time management, whatever it is, but in a way that actually speaks to the current level that is required, the current level of leadership, and also require the current level of skill set that is required for you to excel well. There's a support mechanism that is currently missing, that we experience that women in research leadership are really struggling to be able to juggle all of what is expected of them, plus what I would say the additional care responsibilities that are placed on women in leadership positions. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Jemima?
Thanks. And first, to really reiterate that point that Dorothy talks about in terms of how do we really support women who are already in leadership to stay there, because I think there's been a lot of conversations recently about what we call, hanging cliffs, where women are actually falling out of leadership even after a lot of efforts to get into leadership. So initially we used to think about only the sticky floors, how to get women up the system, and now when they get up the system, they're then facing a hanging cliff where it's so easy to then fall off the system. But I also want to say a huge part of this is also going to be societal change, because women in leadership are not in a vacuum. I think Erica said that we are living in a very gendered world. And the extent to which society starts to see women's leadership as normal, the day we will actually all stop clapping because a woman has been appointed CEO, and because it's a rare sight to see, or has been appointed the vice chancellor of an organization, because it's still a rare sight to see, when it becomes acceptable and normal and part of life that women are leaders. So even as we think about women's leadership, we really have to think about how society itself needs to change. How do we use media? How do we use the champions, the male champions that are around, to actually start changing the narrative? So there's a part of the narrative that also needs to change, and this will take much more effort and a very broad societal effort, because until we do so, women in leadership are going to keep being an anomaly, and not an accepted fact. And that broad societal change comes with also recognizing some of the multiple roles that women are expected to play, and how that also shifts to support women.
But thank you very much for those, and some really lovely metaphors to kind of take us into, as we move forward, right, about the sticky floors that women have had to navigate, and also those hanging cliffs that are there when you need to top, and what do we do in terms of support to ensure that women stay there? I want to move to a question around intersectionality, which comes up from participants, and maybe ask you, Erica and Dorothy, to respond to that. And the question is around related to how do we assess or think about intersectionality in our organizations? How do we think about that? And I would think, as an extension, given the topic, how do we think about intersectionality in this grant making cycle? So if I could ask the two of you to respond as you wish to that question. Erica?
Sure, happy to go first. So this is actually a topic that we've thought about quite a lot. And I think that one thing that's important to say around when we start to discuss issues of intersectionality and projects that are, and research initiatives that are truly intersectional in the methodologies as well as the analysis, it's something that can be seen as very daunting for many individuals, especially those coming from different disciplines. But it's impossible not to recognize these challenges if we want to truly understand the issues that our organizations are working within. So we have to understand, so going back, I think, to the original point, we have to understand who the people are and what the context is that we're working within. But it also comes down to being able to have the right data and information. So for example, in the field that I'm working in, antimicrobial resistance, there is very little even sex disaggregated data. It's not commonly reported to many of the major global surveillance systems. And without even having that, then moving into gendered and intersectional data analytics, and then using that to actually support research on the right intersectional research questions is going to become very, very difficult. So in many cases, at least the perspective that we've often taken is, first of all, we have to get the sex and gender part right, and that shouldn't be something that we are still not getting correct. But of course, it's difficult also when we're looking at things around, for example, global surveillance. We are asking facilities that are, a rural facility in a country to start collecting data that may be slightly different. So we have to recognize that the background behind having this data also takes human resources and needs to be well resourced and trained as well with the right methodologies, and make this easier and more possible for people to first of all start looking at the basics of sex disaggregate. And then I think we can continue to push further into the questions around intersectionality. But I think we really need to learn from other areas that have done this well. For example, we look a lot to HIV/AIDS, where really I don't think until gender and intersectionality was brought forward in terms of tackling HIV/AIDS did we really start to see global progress. And similarly, when you look at for example, even the Ebola outbreak that we saw many years ago in West Africa, it wasn't until we started looking at the cultural practices that we were able to harness and start to actually develop preventative measures for these global challenges and in this case, regional challenge. Yeah. And so I think we need to not wait until we start to see an issue emerge that requires an intersectional approach, but start to have the information and fund the research up front so that we understand these practices and we understand what is needed to actually start addressing some of these solutions. So really, we need to start with the basics, but we need to think a little bit more ahead before we start to have to tackle this only through experience of real life challenges.
Thank you. Dorothy, a response from you?
Thank you. I want to make maybe 1 or 2 points around intersectionality. One of the things that I've come across lately, when we discuss intersectionality, people talk about how complicated it is and it's complex and how you're asking us to do beyond sex and gender. Now we must include intersectionality. And my comment is that humankind, human beings are a diverse species. We come both as men, as women, But we also come as Black people, as Indigenous people, as short people, tall people, people who have got disability. So how can we actually build a research ecosystem and a research enterprise that doesn't take into consideration all of the diversity where it is applicable? A lot of researchers in the global south, on our continent, have already been doing this work because it's impossible for you to do applied research in a space like South Africa, where you don't think about the intersection of race and gender, for example, because otherwise, who are you doing the research for? Or how is the user orientatedness of your research going to be looking like? And so for me, it's a point, number one, to encourage people to think about the research user orientatedness and how relevant your research becomes when you start to think beyond sex and gender and you start to think about intersectionality. And then the second point for me, it goes back to how do we fix the science around this? And we need to start doing some work. Those of us who are really embedded in this question, in this work, in the social sciences, we need to start supporting the natural sciences and everybody else to be able to think about the methodological implications of considering intersectionality. So I'm currently involved as a group of global authors that are working on a perspective for nature to actually look at this from a publishing perspective. How do we support editors and reviewers of journal articles so that they can be able to think about intersectionality as a methodology and the way that they review that? And I think that's a kind of support that is currently needed for those who are in the forefront of supporting this work and driving this work and making sure that we are mainstreaming it, not just that it is in the social sciences space, but it also moves as a methodological approach that can be utilized in the natural sciences as well. Thank you.
Great, and some support in the chat for kind of this idea of understanding the human being in all its complexity and all our dimensions. We have to and we must, and that we should be approaching that task of thinking about intersectionality, not with fear and worry, but with excitement and enthusiasm, because those are the solutions to all of our issues really rely in confronting that complexity. I'm going to go to the third question, and then we're going to try and go to the chat. The chat is hotting up there, like 5,500 questions there. I'm going to choose a few for you to answer, but this is a question that comes up often, so I want to just ask one or two of you to respond to it. And it's the comment that we understand that women are the most vulnerable and are excluded in many areas, including science, technology, and innovation. But as we do this, we must ensure that we don't exclude men. So as we rightfully kind of address gender, and we kind of the importance of including women in science, technology, and innovation, what do we do to make sure that we don't exclude men, and that we are not giving that women are not given undue advantage over men? So I'm going to ask just two quick responses on that, and then we're going to switch to the chat, and it's really hotting up there. So Jemima, should I kick off with you? Why, as we focus on women, we're going to lose, there's a danger we lose men. There's a danger that we exclude them. Quick response from you, please, Jemima.
So two things. One is that we need to engage men, and we need to even engage boys, because boys then become men. And so we need men to engage around the issues of gender equality, of diversity and inclusion, because they are part of that diversity. And one of the things that we need to really be articulate and clear about is that gender equality is good for everybody. It's not just good for women. It improves families, it improves countries, it improves communities. And so we all must be in this together. And so the engagement of men and boys, whether it is in supporting women who are in leadership, because we know a majority of the men are in leadership today, if it is how they enact the right policies, the right workplace culture that supports women, that's really, really critical. What I also tell people is we are not at the point where women are having undue advantage. I think all our data everywhere tells us that. So I also don't want us to have this notion that we are, I hear it all the time, we are over empowering girls. We are still not at the stage where girls around the world are living the decent lives and dreams that they aspire to be. What I say is we also must teach our boys to live in this world where girls have dreams. We must teach our boys to live with these girls that aspire to be more than looking after babies. We must teach our boys to live with these girls and leaders who want to be engineers and who want to be astronauts, and to be able to support them. So there is a historical reason why there is so much focus on women and girls at the moment. Our data still shows us that. As we do this, men must be part of this. Men must be part of this process. We must make sure that we are having boys that are also growing with confidence, that are growing with positive ideas about masculinity, and that's the work of all of us to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, thank you. I thought it was a lovely response. I'm gonna leave you with the last words on that particular issue. And as Hilda also agrees in the chat, we are not there yet. We are not there yet. Our work remains. A question which has come up from the chat I want to ask is just to ask you to just reflect on, in your experience, what have been the strongest motivators and drivers for advancing gender equality in research? What have been the strongest, what has worked well? If you could each just give us one thing, the strongest motivator, the strongest driver for including gender equality and inclusivity in your research. One thing from each of you. Erica, let's start with you.
So I think I spoke to a few things, so hopefully that got the whoever posed this question, their brain thinking about this. But ultimately for me, it's that we are not going to achieve our objectives in terms of achieving sustainable development goals without understanding this issue. So it's curiosity and the need to better delve deeply into gendered experiences of different challenges, and in my perspective, it's health challenges. So I think that's been, but being able to then articulate that and make a convincing case to those who may not be able to appreciate the issue is really critical. So to be able to show why we need to include a gender lens, or else we will not achieve our objectives, was incredibly helpful. And I'm going to add one more little one, which is that we had a few opportunities from funders who are interested in this. And I think that there is a mandate. There are opportunities. Funders are starting to be increasingly focused on gender and inclusivity. So I'd also say to search out for the opportunities that are there, because I'm seeing more and more occurring as of late.
Great. So again, reinforcing the why, and I think that's coming through strongly today, both the point you made, Jemima, and you making, we've got to provide the compelling evidence, the why it matters. It matters, yes, but why? Dorothy, over to you. You can see I'm now on fire now. I'm trying to get through it. Dorothy, over to you. Your one gem, your takeaway. What are the motivations and drivers?
Thank you. So I'll make it two short ones. The first one for me is that I have found it so important to combine advocacy with a deep sense of technical competence and understanding the data and evidence, so that you are able, when you're called upon, you have the right language and you have the data to be able to convince. And number two, it is proximity to leadership that is often men in the public funding agency space, and ensuring that you are providing them with the information so that they can become allies. Because what I have found in my two areas where this has been something that I've worked in, academies of science and now public funders of research, is that when the leadership of the organization is convinced there's the data and they have the language for this, and you have the time to work with them through this, everything else becomes so much easier to do. Thank you.
The evidence, the language, and the leadership. Thank you. Jemima, you've just disappeared. I was just going to ask you for your pearls of wisdom. Your thoughts, Jemima, what's worked?
I'm sorry, it's that time of the morning where kids are leaving, are getting out of the door to go to school. So I think I'll finish where I started. Why are we doing research? For who are we doing research? And therefore, who should also do research? I think my parting shot is our addressing gender equality, the gender inequalities that we see in society, in the research space. It's good for all of us. It's good for humanity. I actually don't think we have any other option, really. We really must do. What else to say? We really must do this, and we must get it right.
Thank you. I'm going to try and go back to the chat and maybe just take one more question from there. I'm aware that we are running out of time. But it's a question perhaps on local knowledge. How is local knowledge how is local knowledge been integrated into research? Most of our research data has been on Western methodologies. How do we ensure and how are we more sensitive to incorporating local knowledge in our research and in our frameworks? Anyone like to respond to that question?
I can briefly start. So my perspective on this is that I work with governments and research institutions on specific nationally owned challenges. And so and I recognize my perspective as well. I sit in our headquarters in Copenhagen, and this isn't knowledge that I hold nor that I have. We need to empower those with the knowledge at the community level to be able to be fairly represented in initiatives. And that also means breaking down barriers within a country, being able to make sure that those within the communities are also given a seat at the table. And it's not always through the traditional community leadership, for example. It may be finding other groups, associations, other actors that speak from a different perspective. And so I think from my view as a funder, what I can do is to push and make sure that we have represented a broad group of actors and that we are working with a diverse team who will be able to navigate and also identify the right actors that have the local knowledge, because these issues are so embedded within communities. They are very, very specific to the context. And so we need to make sure that we are ensuring that everyone is represented, everyone has a seat at the table, and we're adopting different community participatory approaches to be able to speak to that, and also within teams that we have diverse teams that bring in different perspectives and from different backgrounds as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other responses from anyone? Dorothy, was it a smile, a yes, or?
I would like to add a comment to this. For me, there's a broader question around this question of local knowledge. So when we've done synthesis or reviews to ask researchers in Africa and in the global South, what matters in your research is that they tell us often that my research needs to be locally relevant. And I'm doing my research in a way that it is locally relevant. The question for me is about visibility. Visibility of the research and the researchers that are doing this research in the local context in a way that it can be taken up in the global space. And this is why initiatives for me like the African Open Science Platform that is starting to think about open science is so important, because then we will be increasing the visibility and the profile of this research. And we can start to ask ourselves different questions about locally relevant research and how the communities are engaged, because it is there. It's just that it's not visible, or there's limited visibility at this point in time. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'm going to ask, there are 3 questions I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to respond to that one question as a way of just wrapping us up and getting us to the bottom of the hour. And so Jemima, I'm going to start with you, and the question for you is around the UN mandate and what role can science councils play in generating national gender data. So is there a role for science councils in this UN mandate that you talked about? So I'm going to just pause for a second there. And then Erica, to ask you, are there tools and frameworks for gender equality and inclusivity for different respective contexts? And I think the context were in the kind of African region. Are you aware of tools and frameworks for thinking about gender and equality and inclusivity for different contexts? And then Dorothy, a last question for you. How do we prioritize, what do we prioritize around gender equality and inclusivity as we kind of think about the SDGs 2030? So SDGs 2030, what do we need to prioritize on gender and inclusivity? Equality. So those will be your 3 concluding comments. You may also just say goodbye at the end of that, just because I'm nice. I'm going to give you an extra minute to do that, and I will thank you and our audience at the end. So please, Jemima, to you.
Thank you. So within our UN mandate, I think one of the things to realize is that we do have some UN agencies, including the UN DESA, that have capacity for large-scale data collection. But really, a lot of our data and research is national level data. It is data that is coming from countries, and all we do really is support countries, provide, and especially around gender data, provide technical support and sometimes even financial support to actually collect this data, but also move from just the collection of the data to the use of the data. So in as much as we can start forming those comprehensive national partnerships that include the national research foundations with the national statistical offices, because we also have UN statistics, a lot of the time we actually at country level deal with the national statistical services, but those national statistical services in a lot of cases are connected to the national research foundations. So we really work to strengthen that national ecosystem for data collection, because if we don't do that, then we actually don't have any global level data to work with and to push for some of these global normative standards and policies that I talked about. In terms of the last question you asked on SDGs and the priorities around SDGs.
Ask Dorothy to do that one, Jemima.
Okay, okay, fantastic.
Thank you very much for that UN response. Let's go to you, Dorothy. You've got a nice little segue, and then we'll end with Erica.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi, for this. So for me, when I think about the SDGs, I think about the fact that gender equality cuts across all SDGs. And so the question of prioritization for me, it's a question of how do we deepen the work across all of the SDGs? And it comes back to this question of ensuring that we've got data and evidence across all of them. Yeah. It comes back to this question of thinking the whole time across each of the SDGs. How am I contributing to fixing the system? How am I contributing to fixing the numbers? And how am I contributing to fixing the science in each of the different SDGs? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely. Thank you. Erica, to you, frameworks, tools that speak to different contexts. Do you know of any?
Yes. So there's many, actually. So I think just in short, there's many at a broad level that can be applied. For example, there's a great WHO TDR document on applying an intersectional gender lens to any infectious disease challenge. But I think what is important is that there isn't enough of highly tailored resources. And we are talking about complex challenges. So for example, in antimicrobial resistance, when we look at a very specific tool, we need to look at animal, environmental, human health. We have to look at the role of healthcare workers. We have, which is innately gendered as well. I mean, the list is very long. So I think there's very much a need to make sure that disciplines are tailoring these resources ourselves. That's what we've actually been working on with HSRC in South Africa, which is very exciting. But I think that from my knowledge, there's more that have been tailored to technical disciplines and less that are tailored to regions. And I think when we're also talking about intersectional challenges, then we also need to make sure that we are taking that regional focus as well. So we tried to focus on Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, but I think that is something that can always be improved. So in short, yes, there are, but there can be more, and to echo the panelists, it can always go deeper.
Right. And so Ingrid, one of my colleagues from HSRC has just dropped a link to an intersectionality and gender toolkit. We will make sure we're going to load this webinar onto our YouTube platform, but we also will make sure that we'll get from Erica any other possible links, resources she has, and that we know of. We'll drop those as well so that participants on this webinar could have access to them. We're going to also just drop into the chat now as we come to an end, an evaluation form that you could maybe just fill in, give us some sense of how this webinar has gone, what's worked, what hasn't, and what we can do to improve. We will really appreciate that. We're going to ask you to watch out for the next Reflections at the Intersections webinar in early 2024. We'd love to kind of welcome you and your engagement and participation in that. But just to end by saying a huge, huge thank you for what's been quite a wonderful, wide-ranging, lovely, and important conversation. So thanks to you, Dorothy and Gita. Thanks to you, Dr. Jemima Njuki. Please go back to sleep now. I don't know if you're allowed to go back to sleep now, but the kids are gone off. Have a nice cup of coffee. Start your day properly. It was really wonderful having you join us. And thank you very much, Miss Erica Westwood. Lovely to have you too. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to all of you for joining us. We wish you a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you may be. And may the force and the work continue. It's really up to all of us to continue this work. Thank you very much and goodbye.